Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. Now, back to Marcus Bellerio. He thought she was only a maid. A quiet black woman in a gray uniform, standing near the back of the cathedral with trembling hands and a sealed envelope pressed against her chest. But before the bells stopped ringing that afternoon, Marcus Bellerio would learn that judgment does not always arrive wearing a badge. Sometimes, it arrives in the hands of the woman everyone ignored. The wedding was supposed to be perfect. White roses climbed the marble columns. Crystal chandeliers poured gold light over the aisle. Every seat was filled with politicians, bankers, old family friends, and men in dark suits who never smiled. At the altar stood Marcus Bellerio, the most feared Mafia boss in Chicago. Tall, silent, immaculate in a black tailored suit. Beside him stood his bride, Victoria Ashford, wrapped in silk and diamonds, one hand resting gently on her stomach. Everyone knew the story. Victoria was pregnant. And today, Marcus was marrying her to give the child his name. To the world, it looked like honor. To the people in that room, it looked like power joining power. But in the last row, near the side door, Clara Johnson could barely breathe. She had worked in the Bellerio mansion for 9 months. She cleaned the floors people walked across without seeing her. She folded shirts worth more than her monthly rent. She served dinners where dangerous men whispered about loyalty while laughing over wine. Clara knew how to disappear. But today, disappearing would make her guilty. Her fingers tightened around the envelope. Inside was a DNA test. Inside was the truth. And the truth could destroy the wedding before the priest finished his blessing. Do it, she whispered to herself. But her feet would not move. At the front, Victoria smiled like a queen. Her blonde hair fell perfectly over her shoulders. Her diamond veil shimmered under the cathedral lights. Then the priest asked the question. If anyone here knows a reason these two should not be joined in marriage, the room held its breath. A few guests smiled, as if the line was only tradition. Marcus did not move. Victoria's smile remained soft. Then, from the back of the cathedral, a chair scraped against the stone floor. Everyone turned. Clara stood, a maid, a black maid, in a room full of wealth, bloodlines, and arrogance. For one long second, nobody spoke. Then someone laughed. Victoria's mother leaned toward the woman beside her and whispered loudly enough for half the room to hear. Is the help really interrupting the wedding? A ripple of cruel amusement moved through the guests. Clara swallowed hard. Her eyes stayed on Marcus. Mr. Bellerio, she said, her voice shaking but clear. Please don't say yes. The room went silent. Victoria's smile froze. Marcus slowly turned his head, and for the first time that day, he truly looked at the maid. Clara raised the envelope with both hands. There's something you need to see before you marry her. The envelope felt heavier than stone. Clara stood alone in the center aisle, hundreds of eyes fixed on her as though she had committed a crime simply by speaking. And perhaps, in their world, she had. A maid was supposed to clean. A maid was supposed to serve. A maid was supposed to stay invisible. Not stop a wedding. Not challenge a woman wearing a diamond ring worth more than her lifetime earnings. And certainly not challenge the future wife of Marcus Bellerio. The whispers started immediately. What is she doing? Has she lost her mind? Security should remove her. A few guests laughed openly. Others looked at Clara with the same expression people reserved for stray animals that wandered into expensive restaurants. At the altar, Victoria recovered first. Her frozen smile returned, polished and beautiful. But Clara noticed something nobody else did. The brief flicker of panic in her eyes. Gone in less than a second. But it had been there. Victoria slowly turned toward Marcus and placed a hand on his arm. My love, she said softly, almost laughing. This is absurd. Several guests chuckled. Victoria looked back at Clara. What exactly are you doing? The question sounded calm. But underneath it was something sharp. Dangerous. Clara felt her pulse hammering inside her chest. She should have been terrified. Instead, she remembered another face. A small face. A child's face. The reason she was standing there at all. The reason she could no longer stay silent. Before she could answer, one of Marcus's security men stepped into the aisle. A giant in a black suit. His expression cold. Miss, sit down. Clara didn't move. The guard took another step. I said sit down. The cathedral felt smaller. The air felt heavier. Clara knew this moment could destroy her life. She could lose her job, her apartment, everything. But she had already come too far. She tightened her grip on the envelope. No. Gasps rippled through the room. The guard looked stunned. Few people ever told Bellerio security no. At the altar, Victoria's father stood abruptly. An expensive suit, silver hair, the confidence of a man who believed money solved every problem. This is outrageous, he snapped. Marcus, remove her immediately. Several guests nodded. She's clearly seeking attention. Probably wants money. These people always do. The word struck Clara like slaps. These people. Not Clara. Not a woman. Not a human being. Just one of those people. She lowered her eyes for a moment. The old shame returned. The same shame she'd carried since childhood. The shame of being judged before she even spoke. Then a voice cut through the cathedral. Cold. Controlled. Powerful. Enough. Every sound stopped instantly. Marcus Bellerio had spoken. The Mafia boss slowly stepped away from the altar. His polished shoes echoed against the marble floor. One step, then another. No one dared interrupt. No one dared breathe too loudly. Marcus stopped halfway between Clara and the altar. His dark eyes settled on her. Not angry. Not yet. Simply watching. Studying. The way a man studies a loaded weapon before deciding whether it is dangerous. You interrupted my wedding. His voice remained calm, which somehow made it more frightening. Clara nodded. Yes, sir. You told me not to marry her. Yes, sir. The room remained completely silent. Marcus glanced toward the envelope. What is it? Clara swallowed. Every instinct told her to run. Instead, she lifted the envelope higher. A DNA test. The words exploded through the cathedral. Victoria's smile vanished again. This time everyone saw it. Her mother turned sharply toward her. Her father froze. Several guests exchanged confused looks. A DNA test? Someone whispered. Marcus's expression darkened slightly. A DNA test for who? Clara opened her mouth. But before she could answer, Victoria suddenly stepped forward. Her voice came faster than before. Almost desperate. Marcus, this is ridiculous. She laughed. Nobody joined her. It's probably fake. Still nobody laughed. The cathedral had changed. Moments ago, Clara had been the joke. Now people were staring at Victoria, watching, waiting, looking for cracks. And for the first time all afternoon, the future bride looked afraid. Clara met Marcus's eyes. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. Sir. She held out the envelope. The child she's carrying isn't yours. The room went silent. The room went silent. Not the polite silence of a wedding ceremony. Not the respectful silence of a church. This was something else. A heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to drain the air from the cathedral itself. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody blinked. Nobody breathed. Then chaos erupted. What? Impossible. Did she just say the baby isn't his? The whispers exploded across the pews like wildfire. Guests leaned toward one another. Phones appeared beneath tables. Faces that had been smiling moments ago were suddenly tense with curiosity. At the altar, Victoria looked as if someone had slapped her. The color drained from her face. Her fingers tightened around her bouquet so hard that several white rose petals snapped loose and drifted onto the floor. No. The word escaped her lips before she could stop it. Marcus heard it. Everyone heard it. His eyes narrowed. Not because of Clara's accusation. Because of Victoria's reaction. An innocent person would have laughed. An innocent person would have demanded proof. Instead, she looked terrified. Marcus slowly extended his hand toward Clara. Give it to me. The command was quiet. Clara walked forward. Every step felt unreal. The cathedral seemed to stretch endlessly around her. She could feel hundreds of eyes following her movement. The maid. The woman everyone mocked. The woman who had just stopped the wedding of the most powerful man in Chicago. When she reached him, her hand trembled slightly. Marcus took the envelope. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Clara expected anger. She expected hatred. Instead, she saw something colder. Calculation. Marcus Bellerio wasn't a man ruled by emotion. He was a man who survived by finding truth. No matter how ugly that truth might be. He opened the envelope. The sound of tearing paper echoed through the cathedral. Victoria's breathing quickened. Marcus. Her voice cracked. He ignored her. Inside the envelope were several pages. Medical reports. Laboratory seals. Official signatures. Marcus scanned the first page. His expression remained unreadable. The second page. Still nothing. Then he reached the DNA summary and froze. The room felt suddenly smaller. Victoria took a step forward. "Marcus, please." Still he said nothing. Her father rushed toward them. "This is nonsense." Marcus raised one finger. The older man stopped immediately. Not because he wanted to, because fear took hold of him. Every person in that cathedral knew one thing. When Marcus Bellerio became silent, people should be worried. Very worried. His eyes remained locked on the paper. Then he slowly lifted his gaze toward Victoria. The bride nearly stopped breathing. "Where did she get this?" Victoria asked. Nobody answered. "Marcus, look at me." Still no answer. A single bead of sweat appeared near her temple. The guests noticed. So did Marcus. And so did Clara. For the first time, Victoria Ashford looked less like a bride and more like someone standing in front of a judge. Marcus folded the documents carefully. Too carefully. The kind of careful movement people make when controlling their anger. The gesture frightened Clara more than shouting would have. Because powerful men shouted. Truly dangerous men didn't. Victoria's mother hurried forward. "This woman is lying." Her voice echoed sharply through the cathedral. "She's jealous. She's trying to ruin our family." Several relatives immediately agreed. "Throw her out. Call the police. Arrest her." The accusations flew toward Clara from every direction. Yet Marcus never looked away from Victoria. Not once. Because he had noticed something. Something nobody else had. Throughout all the shouting. Throughout all the panic. Throughout all the accusations. Victoria had never denied the test. She had never once said, "The baby is yours." Marcus finally spoke. One sentence. Just 6 words. But they changed everything. "Who is the father, Victoria?" The bride froze. The cathedral froze with her. Victoria opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her eyes darted toward her father. Then her mother. Then the exits. Like a trapped animal searching for escape. Marcus saw it all. And deep inside him, something began to break. Because a man can survive betrayal from enemies. But betrayal from the woman standing at the altar beside him. That wound cuts differently. And for the first time that day, Marcus Bellerio began to fear that the maid was telling the truth. The question hung in the air like a blade. Who is the father, Victoria? No one moved. No one spoke. Even the priest stood frozen beside the altar, his prayer book hanging loosely in his hands. Victoria's lips parted, then closed again. Her face had become impossibly pale beneath the cathedral lights. Marcus watched her carefully. For 3 years, he had known this woman. 3 years of dinners, vacations, charity galas, and whispered promises about the future. 3 years of believing she loved him. And now, standing only a few feet away, she suddenly looked like a stranger. "Answer me." His voice remained calm. That frightened her more than anger ever could. "Marcus." Victoria forced a weak smile. The kind people use when desperately trying to hold together a collapsing lie. "This isn't the place." The room went silent again. Because everyone heard what she did not say. She still hadn't denied it. Marcus slowly tilted his head. A habit his closest associates recognized immediately. It meant he was thinking, calculating, looking for the truth hidden between words. And Victoria knew it too. Her pulse raced. For months she had prepared for every possible problem. Questions from journalists, suspicious relatives, even rival crime families. But she had never prepared for Clara Johnson, a maid, a woman she barely remembered existed. At the back of the cathedral, Clara felt her knees weaken. Part of her wanted to disappear, to run, to escape the storm she had created. But another part knew she could not. Not after everything she had seen. Not after the promise she made. Marcus folded the DNA report once more. Then he turned toward Clara. The movement startled everyone. "Come forward." Several guests gasped. Victoria's mother looked horrified. A maid does not belong at the altar. Marcus ignored her. His eyes never left Clara. "Come here." Clara slowly walked toward him. The marble floor echoed beneath her shoes. Each step felt heavier than the last. When she reached the front, she stopped several feet away. Marcus studied her face. For the first time since she interrupted the wedding. Not her uniform. Not her position. Her. "You seem very certain." Clara swallowed. "Because I am." Victoria suddenly exploded. "No." The sharpness of her voice shocked the room. She pointed directly at Clara. "She's lying. There is no proof. The test is fake." Marcus glanced toward her. Immediately she fell silent. The look in his eyes made her regret speaking. Not because it was violent. Because it was disappointed. And disappointment from Marcus Bellerio was far worse. Then why are you afraid? The question struck her like a slap. Victoria opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Marcus turned back toward Clara. Tell me everything. The cathedral held its breath. Clara looked down briefly. She had hoped this moment would never come, because telling the truth would expose someone she had promised to protect. But there was no turning back now. 6 weeks earlier, she had been cleaning one of the guest suites in the Bellerio mansion, a room rarely used, a room reserved for important visitors. She had entered expecting dust. Instead, she found Victoria, not alone. The memory still made her stomach tighten. Victoria had been arguing with a man Clara recognized immediately, Luca Moretti, the son of a rival Mafia family, one of Marcus Bellerio's most dangerous enemies. Several guests gasped. Others exchanged nervous glances. Marcus remained motionless. Only his eyes changed, growing colder, much colder. Clara continued. I wasn't supposed to hear them. I tried to leave, but I heard enough. Victoria looked as if she might faint. Her father stepped forward. Marcus, don't listen to this nonsense. Marcus never looked at him. Not once. Because something inside him was beginning to connect. Small details. Missed phone calls. Late-night meetings. Business trips that never felt quite right. Moments he had ignored because he trusted her. And trust was becoming very expensive. Clara's voice trembled, but she forced herself to continue. I heard him ask about the baby. Victoria closed her eyes. The room froze. I heard him say. Clara's throat tightened. Then she finally spoke the words. What happens if Marcus finds out the child is mine? The cathedral erupted. And at that exact moment, Marcus Bellerio realized his wedding was becoming a funeral for every lie he had ever believed. The cathedral erupted. Gasps, shouts, whispers exploding from every corner of the room. What did she say? Luca Moretti? That's impossible. My God. The name alone was enough to send shockwaves through Chicago's underworld. Luca Moretti wasn't just another man. He was the heir to the Moretti family, the same family that had spent years trying to destroy Marcus Bellerio's empire, the same family responsible for countless betrayals, attacks, and bloodshed. And now, according to Clara, their heir had secretly fathered the child Marcus was about to raise as his own. Victoria stumbled backward. No. Her voice cracked. No, that's not what happened. For the first time all afternoon, genuine panic flooded her face. The perfect bride was disappearing. The carefully constructed mask was breaking apart, and everyone could see it. Marcus remained completely still, almost unnaturally still. The DNA report hung loosely in his hand. Yet the silence surrounding him felt more dangerous than any scream. Because everyone present knew something. Marcus Bellerio was not a man who lost control. When others panicked, he became calmer. And that calmness usually meant someone was about to suffer the consequences. Victoria's father rushed forward. This is insanity. His face had become red with anger. A maid makes an accusation, and suddenly everyone believes her. No one answered, because nobody was looking at him. Every eye remained fixed on Victoria, waiting, watching, judging. Marcus finally spoke. His voice was quiet, too quiet. Did you meet Luca Moretti 6 weeks ago? Victoria froze. The question was simple, a yes or no question, yet she couldn't answer it. And that silence answered everything. Marcus noticed. So did the guests. So did Clara. Victoria shook her head weakly. Marcus, please. Answer. The single word struck like a hammer. She flinched. Her eyes filled with tears. I can explain. The room seemed to darken. Marcus lowered his gaze briefly. Not because he was hurt. Because he was remembering. The first time he met her. The engagement ring. The promises. The future he had imagined. All of it now felt like a story told to a fool. And Marcus Bellerio hated many things. But he hated being made a fool most of all. Victoria took another step toward him. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Please listen to me. Marcus looked at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time in years, he saw fear instead of love. Fear of losing power. Fear of losing wealth. Fear of losing the life she wanted. But not fear of losing him. That realization hurt more than he expected. At the side of the cathedral, Clara lowered her eyes. This wasn't what she wanted. She hadn't come to destroy anyone. She hadn't come seeking revenge. She had only wanted the truth to reach Marcus before it was too late. But truth had a way of destroying lies. And sometimes the destruction was ugly. Very ugly. Victoria suddenly pointed at Clara. This is her fault. The accusation echoed through the church. Clara looked up in shock. Victoria's face twisted with desperation. She followed me. She invaded my privacy. She wanted this. Marcus's eyes narrowed. The room instantly quieted. Because Victoria had just made a terrible mistake. A desperate person attacks evidence. An innocent person attacks the accusation. Marcus knew the difference. His voice became even colder. You still haven't denied it. Victoria stopped breathing. So I'll ask one final time. He stepped closer. The entire cathedral seemed to shrink around them. Did you have a relationship with Luca Moretti? Victoria's tears flowed faster. Her shoulders trembled. And then, she broke. The silence lasted only a second. But it felt like forever. Finally, she whispered a single word. Yes. The room exploded. Several guests stood up. Others covered their mouths. One woman dropped her champagne glass. The crystal shattered across the marble floor. Victoria closed her eyes, as if saying the word had drained every ounce of strength from her body. Marcus didn't react, at least not visibly, but inside him, something fundamental had died. Not trust, not love, something deeper. The belief that the woman before him had ever truly been his. And as the cathedral dissolved into chaos, Marcus Bellerio realized this wedding was no longer about betrayal. It was about discovering how far that betrayal truly went. Yes. The word echoed through the cathedral. Soft. Broken. Impossible to take back. For a moment, nobody moved. It was as if the entire room had forgotten how to breathe. Then the whispers began. Louder than before. More vicious. More shocked. The same guests who had spent the afternoon praising Victoria were now staring at her as though she were a stranger. A fraud. A woman they had never truly known. Marcus Bellerio stood perfectly still. His face revealed nothing. No rage. No heartbreak. No humiliation. And that terrified everyone. Because the people closest to Marcus knew a dangerous truth. The quieter he became, the more catastrophic the outcome usually was. Victoria took a trembling step toward him. Marcus, please. He didn't answer. Please let me explain. Still nothing. Her chest tightened. For the first time since she met him, she couldn't read him, couldn't predict him, couldn't manipulate him. And that frightened her more than anything. The priest quietly stepped away from the altar. Several guests followed. No one wanted to stand too close to the explosion they felt coming. Victoria's father suddenly moved forward, his face red with panic. This was a mistake. He pointed toward Clara. That woman poisoned everything. Clara lowered her eyes. She had heard enough accusations for one day. Yet before she could respond, Marcus slowly turned toward the older man. The movement alone silenced the cathedral. Careful. One word. That was all. The older man's mouth snapped shut immediately. Marcus then shifted his attention back to Victoria. His voice remained calm. How long? Victoria's lips trembled. What? How long? The question struck harder this time. She understood exactly what he meant. How long had she been lying? How long had she been seeing Luca? How long had she planned to deceive him? Tears streamed down her cheeks. A few months. Marcus stared at her. She looked away first. Because both of them knew it was a lie. A weak lie. A desperate lie. Marcus took another step closer. Try again. The room felt frozen. Victoria's knees nearly gave out. Finally she whispered. Almost a year. Gasps erupted throughout the cathedral. An entire year. Nearly the entire engagement. Nearly the entire pregnancy. Nearly every promise she had ever made. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Not because he was emotional. Because he was calculating. Connecting pieces. Every missing puzzle piece suddenly sliding into place. The unexplained trips. The canceled dinners. The secret phone calls. The sudden insistence on getting married quickly after announcing the pregnancy. For months, everyone had assumed she wanted stability for the baby. Now Marcus understood. She had wanted legitimacy. His name. His fortune. His protection. His empire. Victoria began sobbing openly. I never meant for this to happen. Marcus opened his eyes. The look inside them made her take a step backward. Because for the first time, she realized she had completely lost him. Not lost his trust. Not lost his affection. Lost him. Forever. Then Marcus asked the question nobody expected. The question that made Victoria freeze. The question that made Clara's stomach drop. The question that changed everything. Does Luca know? Silence. Victoria's eyes widened. Too wide. Marcus saw it immediately. And so did everyone else. The answer was written across her face before she ever spoke. Marcus. Does he? No. Victoria covered her mouth, her body trembling. Then she nodded. A tiny movement, barely visible, yet devastating. Marcus stared at her. The cathedral became deathly silent, because everyone understood what that meant. This wasn't simply an affair. This wasn't simply betrayal. This had been planned. Luca. Moretti knew. The rival family knew. And suddenly the DNA test looked like something much bigger than infidelity. Much bigger than a broken engagement. It looked like a trap. A carefully constructed plan to place a Moretti heir inside the Bellerio empire. Marcus slowly looked down at the DNA report in his hand. Then toward Clara. The maid everyone mocked. The woman everyone wanted removed. The woman who had just saved him from the greatest deception of his life. And for the first time since the ceremony began, Marcus Bellerio realized that Clara Johnson might be the only honest person in the entire cathedral. The room went silent. But the real judgment had only just begun. Top of form, bottom of form, the room went silent. Not because people had run out of words. Because everyone suddenly understood the same terrifying possibility. This had never been about love. It had never been about a wedding. It had never been about a child needing a father. It had been about power. At the front of the cathedral, Marcus Bellerio slowly folded the DNA report. Once. Twice. Perfectly. The small movement somehow felt louder than all the shouting that had come before. Victoria watched him with red, swollen eyes. For years, she had learned to read Marcus better than most people. She knew the difference between his anger and his disappointment. She knew when he was suspicious. She knew when he was amused. But she had never seen this expression before. It wasn't rage. It wasn't heartbreak. It was realization. And realization was dangerous. Very dangerous. Because once Marcus Bellerio understood something, he acted. Without hesitation. Without mercy. Without looking back. Marcus. Victoria's voice trembled. I love you. The words sounded hollow the moment they left her mouth. Even she seemed to hear it. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Then he asked a question that made her blood run cold. If I wasn't Marcus Bellerio, the cathedral became perfectly still. If I had no money, no one moved. No empire. No one breathed. No power. Victoria's face slowly collapsed. Marcus took one final step closer. Would you still be standing here? The silence answered for her. And everyone saw it. Her father looked away. Her mother lowered her eyes. Even the guests who had defended her minutes ago suddenly found the floor fascinating. Because deep down, they already knew the truth. Marcus gave a small nod, as if confirming something to himself. Not to the room. Not to Victoria. To himself. The woman he planned to marry had never truly chosen him. She had chosen what came with him. The cathedral doors suddenly opened. The heavy wooden panels groaned as several men in dark suits entered. Bellerio security. The sight alone caused nervous whispers to spread through the guests. The lead guard approached Marcus and leaned close. He whispered something into his ear. Something only Marcus could hear. Clara watched Marcus's expression change. Only slightly. But enough. Enough to tell her the news wasn't good. Very slowly, Marcus turned toward Victoria. Then toward her father. Then toward her mother. The silence stretched. Finally, he spoke. My security team searched Victoria's private apartment. Victoria's eyes widened. Her mother froze. Her father went pale. And Clara felt her stomach drop. Marcus continued. 30 minutes ago. No one interrupted. No one dared. The Mafia boss reached into his jacket and pulled out a black folder. A second folder. Thicker than the DNA report. Much thicker. The sight of it made Victoria stumble backward. No. The word escaped her lips before she could stop it. Marcus noticed. Everyone noticed. His voice remained calm. There were messages. Victoria's breathing became uneven. There were bank transfers. Her father closed his eyes. There were recordings. The entire cathedral seemed frozen in place. Marcus opened the folder. Page after page. Evidence. Proof. Documents. Not rumors. Not accusations. Facts. Then he looked directly at Victoria. The woman who had nearly become his wife. The woman carrying another man's child. The woman who had lied to him for almost a year. And he delivered the final blow. Luca Moretti wasn't your lover. Victoria stopped breathing. Marcus's eyes hardened. He was your partner. Gasps erupted throughout the cathedral. Several guests stood up in shock. Others covered their mouths. Victoria looked as though she might collapse. Marcus slowly held up one document. A transfer record. millions of dollars, sent through shell companies, hidden accounts, fake businesses, a trail of money leading directly back to the Moretti family. And suddenly, everyone understood. The pregnancy, the wedding, the rushed ceremony, the Bellerio name, the inheritance. None of it had been accidental. It had been a strategy, a plan years in the making, a plan that would have placed a Moretti heir inside the Bellerio empire. Marcus looked around the cathedral, at the politicians, the businessmen, the relatives, the guests who had mocked Clara, the guests who had laughed when she stood up. Then his gaze found the maid, standing alone near the altar, still holding herself with quiet dignity, still wearing the same simple gray uniform, still trembling. Marcus's eyes softened for the first time all afternoon. Only slightly, but enough, because without Clara Johnson, he would have said yes. And that realization chilled him more than any betrayal ever could. The room went silent. And for the first time that day, the judgment was no longer falling on Clara. It was falling on everyone else. The judgment was no longer falling on Clara. It was falling on everyone else. The cathedral stood frozen beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. A wedding that had begun with music, flowers, and promises now felt like a courtroom. And Marcus Bellerio stood at the center of it. Judge, witness, victim, and executioner. Victoria's tears streamed down her face. The expensive makeup, the flawless appearance, the perfect bride image she had spent years constructing. All of it was collapsing, one crack at a time. Marcus, her voice barely rose above a whisper. Please. He looked at her, not with hatred. That was what terrified her. Hatred meant emotion. Hatred meant there was still something left to save. But Marcus looked at her with something far colder. Indifference. And indifference is where love goes to die. You were going to marry me. His voice echoed through the cathedral. You were going to let me raise another man's child. Victoria broke down completely. I was scared. You were greedy. The words struck harder than a slap. The room went silent. Marcus slowly looked toward Victoria's parents. Both stood motionless. Neither could meet his eyes, because they knew. Maybe not every detail. Maybe not every lie. But enough. Enough to stay silent. Enough to benefit. Enough to hope the truth never surfaced. Marcus nodded slowly, as if confirming his final suspicion. Then he turned toward his security chief. Escort the Ashford family outside. Victoria's father stepped forward immediately. You can't do this. Marcus looked at him. The older man stopped speaking. The look alone was enough. No threats. No shouting. Just a reminder of who Marcus Bellerio really was. Within seconds, security moved. Professional. Efficient. Unstoppable. Victoria's mother began crying. Her father protested. Several relatives tried to intervene. None succeeded. One by one, they were guided toward the exits. The guests watched in complete silence. Nobody wanted to be next. Nobody wanted Marcus's attention. Victoria remained near the altar, abandoned. For the first time in years, she stood completely alone. Her gaze desperately searched the room. Friends, family, allies, anyone. But nobody stepped forward. Because loyalty built on lies disappears very quickly. Finally, she looked at Marcus. The one person she had truly underestimated. Please don't do this. Marcus said nothing. Victoria fell to her knees. The sound echoed through the cathedral. Several guests gasped. A future bride. On her knees. Begging. Humiliated before everyone. But Marcus remained unmoved. Because all afternoon he had watched one person suffer humiliation. Not Victoria. Clara. The woman everyone mocked. The woman they called just a maid. The woman they wanted thrown out. The woman who had been telling the truth. Marcus slowly turned. His eyes found Clara standing near the side aisle. She looked exhausted, emotionally drained, as though the weight of the entire day had finally caught up with her. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Clara immediately lowered hers. Old habits. A maid never looked directly at powerful men. Not for long. But Marcus wasn't looking at a maid anymore. Not after today. He walked across the cathedral, past the guests, past the altar, past the shattered remains of his wedding, until he stood directly in front of her. The room held its breath. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She had expected many things. Termination, security, anger. She had not expected this. Marcus Bellerio extended his hand. The entire cathedral froze. Even the photographers stopped moving. Clara stared at him in confusion. Then Marcus spoke. For the first time that day, there was genuine warmth in his voice. Thank you. 3 simple words. Yet they carried more weight than anything else spoken in that cathedral. Clara blinked, certain she had heard him wrong. Marcus continued. You risked everything. The guests listened in stunned silence. You knew what could happen. His gaze remained steady. You knew nobody would believe you. Clara felt tears gathering in her eyes. Marcus looked around the room. At every guest, every witness, every person who had laughed. Then he delivered the sentence none of them would ever forget. Today, the bravest person in this cathedral wasn't wearing a diamond ring. The room went silent. She was wearing a maid's uniform. And suddenly, every person who had mocked Clara Johnson wished they could disappear. The room went silent. Not because Marcus Bellerio demanded it, not because security forced it, but because every person in that cathedral suddenly felt the weight of their own behavior. The laughter, the whispers, the judgment, the cruel assumptions. All of it now hung over the room like a mirror nobody wanted to face. Clara stood frozen. Her eyes glistened with tears she had fought all afternoon to hide. She wasn't used to being seen. For most of her life, people looked through her, past her, around her, never at her. Especially not men like Marcus Bellerio. Especially not in rooms like this. And yet, somehow, she had become the center of the story. Not because she was powerful, not because she was rich, but because she had chosen courage when silence would have been safer. Marcus slowly lowered his hand. Then he turned toward the altar where he had been moments away from saying yes. The altar where his future had nearly been stolen. The altar that now stood empty beneath thousands of white roses. For several seconds, he simply stared at it. The guests watched in complete silence. Nobody dared interrupt. Nobody dared move. Finally, Marcus reached up and removed his wedding ring. The ring he had planned to wear for the rest of his life. The ring that represented promises, trust, family, a future. Without a word, he placed it gently on the altar. The soft metallic sound echoed through the cathedral. And somehow, that tiny sound felt louder than thunder. Victoria closed her eyes, because she understood what it meant. There would be no second chance, no reconciliation, no private conversation, no way back. The wedding was over. Forever. Marcus looked at the priest. I'm sorry for wasting your time, Father. The elderly priest nodded quietly. I believe truth never wastes anyone's time, son. Marcus gave a small nod. Then he turned toward the guests. Politicians, business leaders, family friends, men who feared him, women who admired him, people who had spent years trying to earn his respect. And he spoke one final time. If Clara Johnson had remained silent today, his voice carried through every corner of the cathedral. I would have married a lot. Nobody looked away. And every person who laughed at her would have helped that lie succeed. The words landed heavily. Several guests lowered their heads. Others looked visibly ashamed. Because they remembered. They remembered laughing. They remembered mocking. They remembered calling her just a maid. Marcus glanced toward Clara, then back at the crowd. My father taught me something when I was young. The room remained perfectly still. He said a person's character is revealed by how they treat people who cannot benefit them. Nobody spoke, because everyone knew exactly where this was going. Marcus's eyes swept across the cathedral. And today, his voice softened. The poorest person in this room showed the greatest character. Clara's tears finally escaped. She quickly looked down, embarrassed, overwhelmed, human. The guests began to clap. One person at first, then another, until the entire cathedral echoed with applause. Not for Marcus, not for the Bellerio family, for Clara, the maid, the woman nobody respected until she forced them to face the truth. Clara stood speechless. The applause grew louder, longer, warmer. For the first time in years, she felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Dignity, not given, not gifted, earned. Victoria watched from the edge of the room as the life she wanted disappeared forever. Not because of Marcus, not because of Clara, because of her own choices. And for the first time, she understood a lesson that money could never buy. The truth may arrive late, but it always arrives. Marcus walked toward the cathedral doors. The afternoon sunlight poured through the entrance, washing the marble floor in gold. Halfway there, he stopped, then turned back toward Clara. A faint smile appeared on his face. Small, genuine, rare. Ms. Johnson. Clara looked up. Yes, sir. Marcus glanced at the crowd, then at her, and said the words nobody expected. You still have a job. A ripple of laughter moved through the cathedral. For the first time all day, Clara smiled. A real smile. And somehow, that smile felt brighter than every chandelier hanging above them. Marcus nodded once, then walked out into the sunlight, leaving behind a canceled wedding, a broken lie, and a room full of people who would never forget what they had witnessed. Because that day wasn't remembered as the day a Mafia boss stopped his wedding. It was remembered as the day a maid stood alone, against an entire room, and won. The cathedral stood silent. The flowers remained. The music had stopped. But something far more important had survived. The truth. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like. Red Heart.